Morning, everybody. Welcome everyone to our first in-person STP Project Selection Committee in a long time. I'm glad to have everybody here. So it's now 9:35 and we're going to call the meeting to order. Before we jump into business, I do want to go through some logistics. For those in the room today, the closest restrooms are through that back door and on the left next to the reception desk. And if you're in the room and you haven't already, please be sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet in the hall. Members of the audience that want to make a public comment later on the agenda should fill out a public comment card and hand that card to Terry Dixon, who's in the back waving, or to any other CMAP staff in the room that you see. So this meeting is also being broadcast on Zoom and it is being recorded. In order for those online to hear what is being said in the room, it's critical that we all use our microphones. You just touch the button on the microphone, it'll change from red to green. So when it's green, your mic is on. And it's also a best practice still to identify ourselves when we make a motion or a second, just for the sake of the folks that are online. For those that are participating via Zoom, please keep your microphones muted unless you're called upon to speak. And when it's appropriate in the agenda, we'll request comments from those online, and you can indicate your desire to speak via the chat box using the raise your hand function. There's several staff monitoring that Zoom, and so we'll recognize you when it's your turn to speak. With that said, I think let's start today with self-introductions of the members here at the table. I'm Kama Dobbs, chair of the committee representing CMAP, and I'll go to my left to Vig.
Good morning, Big Krishnamurti from CDOT.
Good morning, Sis Killen representing the counties.
Heather Mullins with the Regional Transportation Authority.
John Donovan, Federal Highway Administration.
Brent Davis, CDOT.
Dan Burke, CDOT.
John Hodsma, CMAP.
All right, and I know that we do have a couple committee members that are signed in on Zoom. We've got Mayor Shelkey representing the Council of Mayors, who is listening in. Won't be part of the meeting business today. And also advisory member Tony Greep from FTA is logged in on Zoom. Let's also get some introductions from the rest of the folks sitting in the room. Go ahead, starting with Heidi.
Hi, Heidi Lichtenberger, Kane Kendall, Council of Mayors.
Morning, Jackie Forbes, Kane Kendall, Council of Mayors.
Jessica Abdalnor, Kane County Council of Mayors.
Brandon Gaber, IDOT. Brian Larson, North Shore Council of Mayors.
Drew Duffin, McHenry County Council of Mayors.
Joe Surdam with Lake County Council of Mayors.
Daniel Nickelbein with Trans Systems.
Leslie Rower with South Suburban Mayors Managers.
Terry Dixon, CMAP.
Go to Doug.
Doug Ferguson, CMAP staff.
Blanca Vela Schneider, CMAP.
Ryan Elke, CMAP.
Mary Weber, CMAP.
And John, could you give us a rundown of who's signed in on Zoom?
Sure thing. So we have Mayor Shelkey, Alex Ensign, Brittany Matias, just Craig Heather, Daniel Thomas, David Tomzik, Jack Malik, John Carpenter, Lee Scooby, Martin Menager, Mike Fricano, Mike Clemens, Tony Greep, Phoebe Downey, Zach Braun.
All right, thank you, John. And we do have a quorum of voting members present, so we will go ahead and get the meeting started. The first item on our agenda is agenda changes and announcements. Staff has no additional announcements and no agenda changes. Does any member of the committee wish to make an announcement or propose any changes? All right, seeing none, let's move on to approval of the minutes. We have before us the draft minutes of April 13th, 2023. Are there any corrections or additions or changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to approve as presented.
Dan Burke, CDOT, motion to approve.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a second?
Grant Davis, CDOT, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Next on our agenda are active program management reports. The first report in your meeting packets provides the current status of the shared fund active projects. And on the final page of that report is the status of the CRISA funded projects selected by this committee. Within the current year, we have updates to target lettings. Both Barrington and Naperville are now targeting the January 2024 letting. The CTA is still awaiting their FTA grant approval so that they can begin construction work. And unfortunately, Batavia did receive a high bid for Prairie Street and has elected to rebid that project in November. That rebidding does not affect the status of their federal fund authorization. Staff also approved a cost increase for Aurora's East New York Street project that was let for construction back in 2021 and is nearing completion. Because of the amount of funding already expended and the status of construction, staff does expect that the increase will be obligated before September 30th. The sponsor had previously requested an increase that we've been carrying in the status sheets for a while. They also included the increase request in the current call for projects, and it did rank 6th among all applications. So we did have some unprogrammed funding remainders, so we went ahead and programmed that in the current year. For CRISA funded projects on the final page of the report, I think many of us know that the recent bill to address the debt ceiling included a rescission of unobligated CRISA funds. So IDOT staff was able to scramble right before the bill was signed and did get the entire state's allocation of CRISA funding obligated. They did have to shift some of the funds to state projects to do that. And so they have committed to replacing the committed CRISA funds with state funds on the projects that haven't been obligated yet. So central office local roads and the district local roads are working with CMAP and the affected agencies to get those programming changes made. So all of the deadlines associated with that CRISA funding remains in effect. The state funds are going to be treated as if they were still subject to the federal deadlines. So, and CMAP's continuing to monitor with quarterly updates. The second report in the packet provides the current status of the shared fund contingency projects. Several of these projects did apply again in this year's call for projects, and those that are being recommended for funding are noted in that status report. Staff does not anticipate that we're going to be able to pick up any more of the contingency projects before the end of this year. So that list will expire on September 30th, and we'll be adopting a new contingency list as we adopt the program later this fall. Are there any questions on the status reports? Comments, concerns? Seeing head shakes, okay. Next on our agenda then is the current accounting update. There are 2 reports in the update. One is for STP and again, one for CRISA. These both include obligations and active reprogramming through July 5th. The CRISA report again notes that IDOT has indicated that they'll honor the unobligated commitments using those state funds. On the STP report for the shared fund, already approved obligation extensions have been included, along with the funds that are ineligible to carry over that will be added to the regional redistribution balance. The region's active program management policies do give sponsors until the end of this month to request extensions. So for the local programs, staff has not yet entered the extensions or expected expirations. This is somewhat significant when we're considering the staff recommendation for the new program in a couple minutes, because that recommendation does include utilizing part of the redistribution to fund some of the projects. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what that redistribution balance is and why we're making that recommendation. So in the slide here on the screen, kind of summarizing what's going on with the redistribution balance, there's 2 columns. On the left is the one that's labeled as planned, is what's included in the accounting report and the agenda. This represents what the redistribution would look like if everything that's still programmed this year actually got obligated by September 30th. The right column that's labeled no obligations is what would change if the federal fiscal year ended today and there were no more obligations, and John's shaking his head because it's a very big number. So, we're certainly going to be hopeful that project phases are going to be obligated. But for that to happen, we would actually need to use some of the redistribution, actually 75 million of it, which would leave us with a balance of about 14 million in redistribution at the end of the year. Assuming that nothing else would be added to our programs before the end of the year. We know that there's already 17 million that can't be carried over to 24 because it just isn't eligible or it's unprogrammed. So if we added that to the 14 million, we'd be starting off federal fiscal 24 with a redistribution balance of about 30 million, just under 31 million. That's if everything went perfectly through the end of the year. Realistically, we don't think that that's going to happen. We don't think we'll use up any of that balance before September 30th. So instead of having 13.8 million as an end of year balance, we're more likely to have closer to 88 million as an end of year redistribution balance. There's also about $80 million in unobligated funding that's not eligible to be carried over in the individual programs at the end of the year. So if none of that funding got obligated by the end of the year, that would be added, and we'd be starting off federal fiscal year 24 with a $168 million balance in redistribution. That's about 3/4 of our annual mark. So that is not good. Reality is definitely somewhere between the two numbers. There are still projects that are going to get obligated before the end of the year, but it's certainly not going to be all of them. So, the reality is we need to be more aggressive about using up that redistribution in the local programs and the shared fund, just all across the region. So, the staff recommendation for the new program is to go ahead and eat into that sum. So we'll talk about that when we talk through the program, but I just wanted to run through those numbers here as part of the accounting update. And are there questions about that before we move to the new program?
I guess, could you walk through, like, what's the ramifications for the projects that say are ineligible for carryover?
So, with the changes that we made to the active program management back in February, I think is when we finally approved that, those projects can continue. They'll continue in next year's program, and they'll need to be listed as we plan to use redistribution to do these projects. So money will not be taken away from individual projects unless, I think that this group is certainly not going to want to take anything from any of the shared fund projects. If an individual council wanted to take a struggling project out of their program, they could, but they don't have to. We are going to have to show in our programs, though, that, this chunk of projects is not technically programmed. It's planning to use redistribution, and it will use that redistribution once that body, council, CDOT, or the shared fund has obligated all of their allotment for that year. So, realistically, we're carrying unprogrammed in 2024, almost 30 million right now. So there's still quite a bit of wiggle room, even with the recommended additions with the new program today. So did that answer the question?
I think so. So the intent is not to basically leave any project high and dry, but still accommodate it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm kind of seeing this as a programming exercise almost just to try to get this funding
It is.
obligated. And I realize that can be very difficult.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the reality is, and we know this, projects struggle, they get behind. So as a region, we're about 9 months behind with our implementation of our projects, and that just continues to roll. Will 2024 be a good year and we'll suddenly get it all obligated? Gosh, I hope so. I mean, as horrible as it would be to sit here and say, I'm sorry, your project can't go to letting because we used all the funding. That would be the happiest day ever to say that we used all the funding. So, I think that, we put these active program management rules into place to address our unobligated balance, and we have to be aggressive about using it. I think there is more than enough cushion. We keep adding a year to the program. You know, if we ever catch up, again, that would be fabulous. You know, I don't think we'll ever 100% catch up. I hope that we can get to, 90%, 95% catch up would be great. And I know 24 is going to be a big year. The city has some really big projects. There's some really big projects in the shared fund. So I'm hopeful we can put a good dent in it in 24. So. Other comments or questions on the accounting? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on then to the new program, which is the exciting part. We have all this money, let's program it. So the memo in the packet does contain an overview of the scoring program development process and staff recommended shared fund program for federal fiscal years 2024 through 2028. As noted in the memo, a total of 60 applications were received from 41 unique applicants. These applications were screened for eligibility, and unfortunately 11 applications were eliminated, either due to not meeting the cost requirements or not being included in a plan, or not having their phase 1 engineering underway. Many of the 49 eligible applications did request consideration in multiple project type categories. So that led staff to conduct 80 evaluations of the 49 applications. New this year, because of the methodology changes that we made that set minimum need thresholds in each category. A first step in the evaluation process was determining if the application was eligible in the requested category. As detailed in the memo, 13 projects were deemed ineligible in one or more project categories, and 7 of these were completely eliminated from consideration because of that. For projects that were evaluated in multiple categories, the category that yielded the highest score for each application was identified, and the lower scoring instances were removed from funding consideration. Because transportation impact scores are calculated relative to all other projects within the category, the final scores were recalculated once all of those ineligible and lower scoring instances of projects were removed. These scores were provided to applicant contacts as well as the region's planning liaisons for review, along with scoring methodology documentation and frequently asked questions about the scoring process. Comments and questions received from applicants were all related to their specific projects. Generally, folks were seeking clarification on an individual scoring element. They thought, they expected to see one number and saw a different number. A few applicants, excuse me, did request consideration of additional information that wasn't submitted with their application, or consideration of milestones that had been met since the application was submitted. Of course, per the methodology, we did not accept any additional information. A few applicants also expressed some concerns regarding how the methodology makes it difficult for their particular project to score well. But those applicants, did acknowledge that the scores reflected the methodology, and they committed to participating in the discussions that'll happen over the next year as we look to tweak the methodology for the next round. So, with that, none of the scores were changed after that comment. After this, they were sent out for comment. So with no changes made, staff proceeded to build the recommended active program that's included in the packet by stepping through the projects in rank order, programming funds in the year requested if funds were available. If funds were not available, we followed the programming process that's described in the application booklet, first attempting to accommodate the fully requested amount in a later year, and then considering partial funding based on the minimum amounts that sponsors indicated that they could accept. If all requested phases of a project couldn't be accommodated at the minimum requested level, then the project was skipped and the next highest ranking project was considered. So this process also took place in collaboration with the staff that was developing the CMAC and TAP programs, so that we were making sure we were maximizing the use of funds across all of those programs. So there's a couple things that were actually high ranking in the shared fund that were skipped because those are being recommended for funding through CMAC, Carbon, or TAP. We also referred to application attachments and consulted with sponsors of projects that were recently selected by IDOT for ITEP funding. as well as, PACE had received a raise grant recently, so that was taken off of their request as well. We also carefully considered how to handle the applications that were seeking cost increases for the current active projects. So as I mentioned with the status reports, Aurora's East New York Street project that had been let in 2021 is expected to be able to obligate the increased funds in FY '23. So that project had ranked 6th in the call for projects and was accommodated in our current program rather than being accommodated in the new program. 2 additional increases were requested for projects that are currently programmed in FFY 2023 that are both now targeting the January 2024 letting. And those are Barrington's US 14 grade separation, which ranked 3rd, and Naperville's North Aurora Road project, which ranked 17th. Both of these projects did rank high enough to be funded in later years of the program. However, staff we were hesitant to suggest delaying construction on these really large projects that have been in our program for many years by programming the increases, in 27 or 28 was where we were going to be able to accommodate them. And we were also hesitant to, set a weird precedent of saying, we're going to program in an out year and plan on executing an amended construction agreement in 3 years. So that's where we looked, to the accounting and to that balance that we have of redistribution and are making the recommendation to go ahead and fund those 2 cost increases in FY '24 using redistribution. So the programming decisions for each of the individual projects are documented in the requested and recommended funding with phase and fiscal year detail, who named that document that's was in the agenda materials. So the resulting staff recommended program shown here includes 16 new projects in federal fiscal years 2025 through 2028. 2 of the new projects are within the city of Chicago, 8 are within suburban Cook County, and 7 are within the collar counties. Within these projects, over $20 million is programmed for projects in our highest need cohort 4 communities, including 1.7 million in toll credits to be used in lieu of local match. And it is worth noting that not all of the cohort 4 communities requested to use toll credits. So it's not, that's why 1.7 million isn't 20% of 20 million. About 1/3 of the projects being recommended are located in small communities with populations of less than 25,000. So just pointing that out because there's always been concern that the small communities can't be competitive in the regional program, but about 1/3 of the awarded projects are in those small communities. The selected projects also show very strong support for our planning factors of complete streets, resilience, and freight. So nobody scored zeros in the planning factors. It's being recommended for funding. So with that said, all of the rest of the eligible projects that applied for the shared fund that aren't recommended for funding either through the shared fund, CMAQ, Carbon, or TAP are recommended to be carried forward in the contingency program, where they can be considered for additional funding that may come to the region or could have funding made available to them from redistribution as they become ready. So that is the recommendation. The next step in our process is to release the staff recommendation for public comment starting this afternoon and extending that through August 11th, which is a Friday. Following public comment, staff would present a summary of any comments received as well as any recommended changes to the program for this committee to consider at our August 31st meeting. If this committee accepts the program at that meeting, then staff would prepare tip changes reflecting the program, take those to the Transportation Committee in September for a recommendation for MPO and board approval at their joint meeting in October. So that's where we are. Right now, I'm happy to answer questions about the process or the recommended program. Questions, comments, concerns from the members?
How many cohort 4 applications did you receive?
I didn't write that in my notes, John.
It wasn't in the memo, so that's. I got it.
All right. Give me 1 second here. think it was 6, but I want to make sure. Well, let me look. Let me take other questions while I'm looking. Other comments or questions? Or is that going to be the only one? Or any of our advisory committee members that are in the Zoom want to ask a question or make a comment? The answer to your question, John, is 6 total eligible applications from cohort 4, and all 6 were recommended for funding. Sorry, I should have had that open. Any other random stats? Because now I've got the whole stat spreadsheet open. No comments or questions? Everybody super comfortable with the recommendation? Or at least to send it out to public comment? All right, well, can I get a motion to open the public comment on the recommended program?
Dan Burke, CDOT, motion to open the program to public comment.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a second?
Big Krishnamurthy, CDOT, second.
Thank you, Vig. Any other discussion or questions? All right, hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I am not opposed. All right, motion carries. We will go ahead and open the public comment this afternoon. Right. Just before we move on, I do want to thank, everybody on the committee, everybody in the region that applied for funding. It was a good group of applications this year. And we do look forward to receiving the public comments and coming forward with a recommended final program at our next meeting. So next is any other business. Do any members of the committee have any other business they would like to discuss today? Seeing none, let's move on to public comment. Terry, did we get any public comment cards? Okay. Well, is anybody sitting there want to speak today? Doesn't look like it. Anyone in the chat on Zoom indicated desire to speak? Right. Anybody who on Zoom who didn't put it in the chat, if you want to unmute yourself and identify, feel free to.
Well organized, Kama, that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Chad. All right, last chance for public comment today. All right, seeing none, our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 31st, 2023. At that meeting, we'll review public comment received on the draft program and consider that final recommendation. All right, seeing no other business, one last reminder, if you didn't sign in when you came into the room, please sign in on the way out. Otherwise, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Sure, Grant Davis, motion to adjourn.
And a second?
Dan Burke, CDOT, second.
Thank you, Grant and Dan. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. With all in favor via voice vote, this meeting is adjourned at 10:04 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.